Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I saw the Lisa pop up, so I thought it might be you. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I can stay on my iPhone. We got new computers at work, and when we take them home and work remotely, it takes a while for it to get up and going. So
okay. Well, you're definitely sounding loud and clear on the iPhone. So whatever works best for you.
okay, I'll just stay, and then I can keep working and doing other things. Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
Hey, everyone.
Morning, Teresa.
And good morning, Chief Spalding.
Good morning. Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock already, but we still have a lot of people signing in. So we're going to give everybody just a couple minutes to get fully signed in. I'm also doing the roll as I see people signing in. How you doing, Monica? You're muted.
Where did I go?
There, can you hear me now?
Yep, now I got you.
Okay, thanks.
Monica, you're back to work?
I'm working from home.
You feeling better? Feeling good?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's a work in progress, I think, learning how to use one hand for a little bit.
What'd you do?
Thank you.
Now you have to tell everybody. Good job.
Oh, I had surgery, arthroscopic surgery on my shoulder. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we'll have to get one of those signs off the highway that says low shoulder.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Hey, Chief. We haven't officially started yet. We're just waiting for the last few people more signing in.
Kenny just ran over to his office, so he's got away from us both.
Okay.
Solving some of the world's problems.
Yeah. Hey, Ron, would you mind muting your microphone?
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It looks like we have vast majority of our membership here and many of our guests. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know there'll be some people probably signing in, and I'll do the best to monitor as they sign in. It's nice to see everybody after almost 6 months since our last meeting. There's obviously been a lot of changes in the city that have put the host committee a little bit on hiatus for the last 6 months or so. Doesn't negate for the need for this group. And I appreciate the mayor asking if I would come back and step in, at least host at least this meeting and maybe the next one until a permanent replacement is found to host the meeting from this point forward. So I was happy to do it. And again, happy to see everybody here. And I know we have quite a bit to cover today. So I'll just go ahead and officially call the meeting to order at 10:04 a.m. And by way of introductions, we have one change from the roster. Kate Allen has moved out of the area, so she has asked to come off of the committee. So I wish Kate the best and appreciate her contribution to the team. Our newest addition, let me let Terry in here. Our newest addition is Chief Stacy Kelly. Chief Kelly joined the Astoria Police Department around August 1st. And, by all accounts, he's doing a great job. He obviously has some big shoes to fill, but again, yeah, he's doing a great job and, trying to get up to speed, or is getting up to speed in a very short order here. So I was fortunate enough to be asked to be part of the selection process, and I thought very highly of him, and I knew that he would be a good fit for the committee, or for the police chief position. And so welcome, Chief, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but feel free if you have anything you'd like to say.
I think you covered it well, so appreciate the welcome.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Okay, roll call. So as I mentioned, I think I checked off most of the names as people were signing in, but I'm just going to go over a couple that I don't see here. Sean Fitzpatrick, Leslie Ford, Eva Haig, Jennifer Holen, Scott Justice. Okay, let's see, I have someone saying, okay. And I know Arlene Lemire couldn't be here today, so she let me know. So roster is complete. So minutes, I realized fairly recently that we're now using a third party to transcribe our minutes. And I thought they weren't done, and I realized that they have been done. So I got those out kind of late. They're in the process of being reviewed. So we're not going to approve the minutes of the March meeting. We will approve both sets of minutes at our next meeting. So apologize for that, but I'll get those out as soon as they're done. So and then, as I mentioned, since the minutes are being dictated by a third party, they don't know all the individuals' names. I do provide them with a roster, but if you remember, if you would try to at least announce your name when we get to a point where if you are going to weigh in on one of our topics, I would appreciate it, and I know they do as well. So with that being said, Mayor Jones.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I really thank you for being willing to continue on this meeting. And I think maybe one more meeting, if you're willing, would be wonderful as we go through a transitional period. On January 1st, we'll have a new mayor, 2 new councilors, and we hope also to have the new city manager in place on January 1st as well. So quite a transition time in leadership. So continuity in this process is really helpful. It's good to see everyone again. I think there's going to be a lot of good information shared today, a lot of new developments. I was really excited to see that the Owens Adair project that the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority is running is so far moving forward with some funding opportunities and low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. They're looking at 50 units, 25 units of people transitioning from homeless at 25% of AMI seniors, and also 25 additional units for seniors at 50% AMI. So I think that's a huge step forward and needed service in the community. There's also forward movement on what's being called the Copeland Commons project, the old State Hotel at 1169 Marine Drive. With a proposal to put affordable housing in that building, and they're a long way from declaring victory, but that the process of planning and trying to get funding for that is underway. So we certainly wish them luck. I think it's a great repurposing of what has been mostly a derelict building for many years in our community. So it's a lot of good stuff happening, and I look forward to hearing everyone's reports. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Appreciate that. So hopefully you all have an agenda for today's meeting. And just to give everybody a heads up, one of the main topics for today is we wanted to ensure that everybody is has an opportunity to hear where the city is going in terms of the camping ordinance that you've probably heard quite a bit about. We're using today's meeting a little bit as a sounding board, and we are really looking for feedback from the group. If there's any pieces in there that aren't clear, and just questions or comments or suggestions. I know I spoke to the mayor, and he is very supportive of hearing everybody's feedback on this before this goes back to council. We've actually had at least 2 council work sessions and at least 6 council meetings where this topic has already been discussed in a public forum with opportunity for public feedback. So the more, the better. Right now, it's my understanding that this camping ordinance portion specifically regarding the place where individuals can be is going back to council on October 17th. And that is tentative, but I believe that's going to be the date, and that will be when the council will hear the last piece of this. So again, nothing is written in stone at this point. What we're talking about today is where we're at as of today. So again, any information that we receive today, will be considered and potentially incorporated in the next version that goes to council on October 17th. The other piece of this, so the order, I actually have listed the camping ordinance as one of the last items on the agenda, although the intention is that we want to make sure we get to that item. And the only reason it's there is because we've also asked the contract city attorney, Chad Jacobs from the attorney firm of Beery, Elsner and Hammond, to sign into the meeting and provide some information to the group. This is a very complex area and ever-changing area of law. As a matter of fact, there was a recent court decision that was just released this morning that changes things to some extent. So I felt that rather than losing something in translation, the mayor asked that Chad Jacobs sign into the meeting and provide the group with some of the legal background and part of the reason that we're even here. So he's going to be signing in around 10:30 or so. He had another meeting prior. And so as soon as he signs in, we'll go ahead and start that topic. So appreciate everyone's flexibility with the agenda, but I'll just start with the agenda at the top. We'll go down through some of the topics, and then we'll break when Chad signs in, and then we'll come back and finish the rest of the topics. Does that sound good, everybody? Okay, thank you. All righty. So let's see. Terry, are you here?
I am here.
Okay. All right. Good morning. Well, you're first up. Updates on the Harbor Shelter Program.
All right. Great. Thank you. Good to see everybody. All right. I'm not great at going first. Let's see. So real quick, over the last 6 months, we've sheltered for the shelter program. We've sheltered 46 people. 22 of the folks actually were in our shelter. And 31, these numbers are a little wonky because the hotel people sometimes go into shelters, so they don't necessarily add up. But 31 people we actually had to put in hotels, either because our shelter was full or because it just wasn't safe for them to stay there, but usually because the shelter is full. The sort of general thing is that we are full all the time, and as soon as somebody leaves, we put somebody in. So we just sort of have the folks just in need of shelter pretty much constantly. Unfortunately, we have to turn some folks away, and those people usually then opt to stay in the situations that they're in with their abusers because it's better to be housed than to be unhoused more often than not. Good news is, though, is that with the help mostly of our great partner at CCA, we have been able to get a few of our shelter clients into permanent housing over the last couple of months, which is super exciting. So I think we have three or four people who've made it into permanent housing, which is great. And then we just have a few people who could get into permanent housing if there was actually a space available. So some folks who were just waiting for openings to come up, which is always a great thing. Other things, we've also been partnering with an organization out of Portland called Finability, who provides financial education and resources to survivors of domestic violence. So we're trying to get folks training around how to use finances, because most, like 98% of domestic violence survivors are experiencing some sort of financial abuse. Either they have never had control of money, or they make all of the money and have to hand it over. So we're trying to get all of our clients into some of these finance trainings to make sure that they grasp how the finances work. And it's also been super helpful for our staff. Even I know that lots of people never actually get any finance training in their lives, and so that's a really good resource for those folks. We have, in the sort of housing arena, not necessarily shelter related, we actually just recently added a housing navigator to our staff, Paula, who I think is on today somewhere. We are partnering with the fair housing folks to have a housing navigator on staff. And she basically just works with clients to find housing, help fill out paperwork, do all of the stuff they need to do. She mostly does a lot of work helping clients connect with CCA or other resources to figure out those places. We don't actually house people, as you all know, and don't have the ability to pay for it or any of that, but just figuring out the resources is what Paula's job is. And she is bilingual, so is able to work with all of our clients. And we have found that, you know, a good 80% of our Spanish-speaking clients especially are really in need of housing, so it's been such a great resource to have her. And she's also getting training from the folks at the Fair Housing Authority, so that's an awesome partnership. So we have that resource available as well. And then I think just the last thing is we've been doing a lot of outreach and training around prevention, sexual assault prevention and services for a lot of, we're trying to get out to a lot of houseless community. So providing these trainings in the places where the houseless community are, so that they're just aware of the services that are provided, especially around sexual assault, because there is a lot of sexual assault on the streets, unfortunately, that there are services available at the harbor, that all medical services after an assault are free, and that everybody has the right to those services. So we want to make sure that word is out there, and then just also talking about prevention and what sexual harassment is to the broader community. So that's something that we're working on doing. We're also doing some of that training with staff at social service agencies, just so that everybody has that information and that we're able to get that out there. And just because this is not necessarily housing or shelter related, but because I like talking about it, we just got a pretty big grant to train up sexual assault nurse examiners in the county in partnership with the Astoria Birth Center, so that we will actually have the ability to do proper sexual assault exams in the county here in a comfortable location.
Okay. Thank you. Terry, does anybody have any questions for Terry? All right. Well, thanks again, Terry. I do.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I recognize Leslie Ford joined in recently. Thanks for joining, Leslie. And our attorney that I mentioned earlier, Chad Jacobs, is now with us. So I think this is a good segue into talking about the camping ordinance that I mentioned earlier. Good morning, Chad. Chad, I've already given a brief introduction, at least, you know, your relationship with the city, and talked about that you're going to, you know, provide a little bit of the legal background and kind of, you know, why we're where we're at today. I didn't go into any great detail from the most recent Ninth Circuit decision, but if, to the extent that that's pertinent, you know, feel free to, you know, chat about that. But I did want everyone to hear directly from you. I consider you the expert in this area as much as anyone can be. And so with that being said, if you just want to provide some background, then I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the actual ordinance. So appreciate you being here today, and I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. So as Jeff said, my name is Chad Jacobs. I'm an attorney here in Portland at the law firm of Beer, Yelzer, and Hammond. And all we do is represent local government. So I was asked to help the city of Astoria with their camping ordinance, particularly because we've got a lot of clients who are working on the exact same thing. So trying to sort of bring some collective knowledge to the process. And, Jeff asked me this morning to sort of just give you a brief background on sort of why we're here and why we're working on the ordinance. And I'll do that. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. But in short, excuse me, this process started a couple of years ago when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal circuit court of appeals that the state of Oregon belongs to, issued an opinion out of the city of Boise called Martin versus Boise. And in that decision, basically what the court said is that it is unconstitutional to enforce an anti-camping ordinance against individuals who are involuntarily homeless when there are not otherwise shelter beds available for them to sleep in. And so unless you can demonstrate that there's an available shelter bed for someone to go to, you can't enforce an anti-camping ordinance against that person. What the court went on to explain, however, is that this doesn't mean that people can camp anywhere at any place and any time in any manner that they want. The cities can still impose these, what we call reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on individuals to say, here's where you can do that, here's the times you can do that, here's the method in which you can do that. The court didn't really provide a lot of guidance about what any of that means. So there's a lot of open questions about how to do something like that. In the meantime, the state legislature last year enacted a bill, House Bill 3115, which is now codified in state law, which basically follows the Boise decision and makes it a state law, that's state right to be able to camp in public or unless there's a shelter bed available. In short, what that law says is that any local county or city law that is going to regulate the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property that is open to the public must be objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner with regard to persons experiencing homelessness. So we have a court opinion that basically requires us to look at our anti-camping laws and make amendments to them. And now we have a state law, on the other hand, which does the same thing. The state law gives us until July 1st, 2023 to get our law amended. The constitutional provisions and the way the court cases have been held is that those apply immediately. So that sort of influences our ability to actually use the laws that are on the books that we haven't amended yet to bring enforcement actions against individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So what we're doing now is we're going through and trying to work on an ordinance that satisfies both the constitutional provisions as set forth in the court, as well as the statutory provisions enacted by the legislature. And so that's the process that the city is going through right now. What's important to keep in mind is that unless you have the ability to build shelter beds that are available to anyone, and the key is being available, because that means you can't really have a lot of restrictions. So, for example, if there's an individual who's experiencing homelessness who has a pet, we have to allow them to, get a shelter bed where a pet can go along with them in order to deem that an available shelter bed. So the idea of creating available shelter beds, in addition to the cost, is not necessarily something that a lot of jurisdictions are able to accomplish, because what truly is available, according to the courts, is very, it's got to be very broad. And there's just not a lot of entities that provide that level of service when you're dealing with shelters. So the path that most jurisdictions are taking now is trying to determine time, place, and manner restrictions to allow individuals who are experiencing homelessness to actually camp when necessary within city limits. And so what that means is going through and identifying, time limits, if you want to pose reasonable time limits on when camping can occur and what makes sense in that regard. Manner being, what things that people can use when they're camping. And, the court just yesterday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a decision yesterday that expanded upon that a little bit. What they said is that you have to allow individuals to use rudimentary precautions to protect them from the elements. Of course, they didn't define what rudimentary precautions are. And in other language, they seem to suggest that maybe sleeping in vehicles is a rudimentary protection. So there's still a lot of open questions about what that means. At the state level, we're looking at a reasonableness standard. So we're trying to look at, the manner in which people are camping. And so when you get into the ordinance and reviewing it with Jeff, you'll see that in Astoria, what we're looking at is allowing people to sleep in tents because of the weather in Astoria. That is something that is reasonable, and it's probably a rudimentary precaution to protect from the elements that exist in Astoria. We're not necessarily, and we have language that specifically precludes actually building of structures, because that would be inconsistent with the time limitations. So you've got time limitations, you've got manner, and what all that means. And then finally, you've got place. Place really is the locations in which you're going to allow camping to occur. And so under both the case law as well as under the statutory provisions that were enacted by the legislature, you've got to basically have a reasonable amount of space for your level of homeless population to be able to camp when necessary. The reasonable standard is also probably going to look at factors such as, how easy it is for folks to access that area, how safe it is for them to access that area and to use that area for camping purposes. So the next step and where we're at right now with working with the city is really trying to identify those locations in the city or those places where camping is going to be permitted. And so that's the bulk of the work that's ahead of us. And it's usually the most controversial work, because a lot of people have very strong opinions about whether and to what extent they want, individuals who are experiencing homelessness to be camping by their particular properties. And so it's a lot of work, but the bottom line is it has to be done, both because of the court cases that have come out from the Ninth Circuit, as well as because of this House Bill 3115. So our hands are sort of tied. We've got to move forward with this. And honestly, certainly depending on your perspective, what the pitch I would make to everyone, working on these issues is what this is doing. It's making us make some deliberate decisions to make sure that, the camping that's going on is done so in a more deliberative manner. That, we're really thinking about this both from the perspective of everyone in the city, including those who are experiencing homelessness, about what's really acceptable to all of us, for those people who are finding themselves in these situations. And the legislature really want to encourage these kinds of discussions that you're having today. And that's sort of why they were pushing 3115. And I just applaud you for actually engaging in these efforts as a group. So with that, I'll stop my talking and I'm happy to answer questions that anyone might have.
Thanks. And one thing I would like to weigh in too is, and I know you touched on it, but one of the definitions of the House Bill 3115, it does talk about being objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner. And that's a key term there. And I know Chad often talks about one of the most important distinctions is that it's not just objectively reasonable to the people enacting the ordinance, but it's from the perspective of the individual experiencing homelessness. And so, we can't look at this through our lens. We have to also look at this through the individual's lens when we're making these decisions. And that's how the courts will review it as well. I believe I'm speaking correctly there, Chad, correct? So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment as well. I really appreciate Chad's ability to take probably between all the different decisions, well over 100 pages of legalese and condense it into something that actually makes sense and can do it in a relatively short amount of time. But clearly there's a lot more information out there. And I'm sure some of you have questions, and definitely we'll open it up to anybody that has questions, whether you're a member or one of our guests today. So if you do the hand raise thing and for questions for Chad, and then I'll go into a little bit more about the ordinance. I'm not seeing any questions, Chad. You must have done such an excellent job in explaining all this.
I don't know if that's the case, that people just don't want to hear me talk anymore. I don't like to hear lawyers talk either, so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I actually have one, if I may.
Sure.
Rockin'. Chad, can you just back up a little bit and talk about the kind of shelter or shelter beds that would be needed in order, the idea is an either you provide shelter beds or you allow camping. But what would the requirements be in terms of providing shelter beds? If we can imagine some way that we could do that, what would that look like?
So the shelter beds can come in lots of different forms. And so if you're talking about specific forms, whether that has to be sort of a dormitory style or individual tents or yurts or whatever the case might be, it can really be anything. It has to be a place where someone can sleep, which is sort of not outside on the streets. The key factor, and I touched on this a little bit before, is that it truly has to be available to the individual who needs it. And whether or not a shelter bed is available for an individual who needs it is fact specific depending on the circumstances of that individual. And so, for example, there's a lot of shelters that you have to be clean and sober to be able to use them. And so if someone is, currently addicted to drugs or an alcoholic and doesn't have the ability to remain clean and sober, they can't go to that shelter, so it's not available to them. Likewise, I mentioned the pet, and someone has a pet, and the shelter doesn't accept pets, then that shelter bed is not available to the individual. So for our police officers who are out there trying to enforce the anti-camping ordinances, to say that a shelter bed's available, they have to do a fact-specific analysis related to the specific individual involved to determine is a shelter bed truly available or not. The other sort of wrinkle to all this is that the decision that came out yesterday made it a little ambiguous about where that shelter bed needs to be located, because what their holding was that it had to be located within the city. And so, if, for example, a shelter is built in Seaside or somewhere nearby, or Warrenton, or anywhere nearby Astoria, and they've got shelter beds available, that's not within the city. So technically, it's not a shelter bed that we can rely on. And that question is still an open question that the courts haven't answered. And so there's another sort of wrinkle to everything about how we're looking at shelter beds and what we can do or can't do.
So what I think I'm hearing is that if two existing things that we have in the community, if our warming center or lifeboat services were open year round and had many, many more beds than they currently have, those conceivably could qualify as the shelters that we need.
If you meet all those other standards and it's truly open and available to anyone, then yeah.
Yeah, I think both of them are.
Of course, the other factor too, Counselor, is that there has to be enough available bed space for all of the homeless individuals who identify as belonging to Astoria. And that's always kind of a hard number to nail down. But if we had, for example, a point in time count that said there's 400 homeless, we have to have that many beds for people or something along that line. So,
yeah.
Sure. I see two hands raised, Monica and then Chief Kelly.
Thanks, Jeff. I was just curious in regards to if somebody has been trespassed from a shelter because of their behavior, what does that mean as far as providing shelter beds? Say there was enough shelter beds for everybody, but some people have been trespassed because of their behaviors or their actions, or they aren't allowed to be around other people. What does that mean in regards to those individuals? Do you know?
It's a great question. The courts have not directly addressed that issue. What they've talked about is whether or not someone is involuntarily homeless. And so the question is going to become a factual argument as to whether the fact that what actions they engaged in to make them be trespassed from the shelter, was that sort of voluntary or involuntary? And so therefore, do they qualify for these protections or not? And I think that's going to be a fact-specific analysis. I can tell you from a legal perspective, my advice to the officer on the street would be not to try to make that call, that you don't enforce the ordinance, and just find them a spot sort of on the street where they can camp for the night in accordance with the time, place, and manner restrictions. Just because I think whether and to what extent you're trying to determine if someone is involuntarily homeless, on the street in those circumstances is fraught with peril.
So, Chad, before I get to my question, I'll respectfully disagree with that, because in our instance, we know the majority of our homeless and we know who's doing what and who's where. And I think we would know if they had refused to go there. But I agree it is a one-on-one basis, but I think we could establish easily if they have been trespassed and that. But my question, and I'll let you answer both, but my question is, like, you read these articles with Portland where they have all these unused beds. So if we ever got to a point where we had shelter and they were refusing to do it, go to the shelter, so then are they now voluntary and we could move them on? And this is not addressed at all of our homeless population, but our frequent flyers that we know choose to be homeless and, would be able to deal with them at that point.
Yeah, so taking your second question first, absolutely. The question is whether or not they're involuntarily homeless. And the courts have sort of looked at that and said, someone's involuntarily homeless when they don't have a shelter bed available to them. So if there's a bed available and they're just refusing to take it, they're not involuntarily homeless. For the purposes of this particular analysis. I mean, for other reasons or statutes that they are deemed homeless, but they're not involuntarily homeless for the purposes of these laws. Likewise, if someone has money available and they just don't want to spend it, they've got another option available and they're refusing. We've run into situations in other coastal communities where you've got, kids on spring break who just want to pay for a hotel room, or, people are coming down surfing and they, want to sleep on the beach for the night. We don't have to permit that when that they've got other means available to, pay for shelter for the night. So in either of those situations, they're not deemed involuntarily homeless, and you can enforce the anti-camping ordinance against them. With regard to the other issue, the point I was making about trying to make a decision on the street is not whether or not they've been trespassed, but whether or not the fact that they were trespassed means that they're voluntarily homeless or involuntarily homeless. And I think that's the specific factual analysis about why they were trespassed and the underlying reasons for their actions that caused them to be trespassed as to whether or not that was quote unquote voluntary or involuntary. For example, the courts have said, that's sort of what this Martin decision is based on, is that drug addiction is not when you take drugs when you're addicted to drugs and you engage in drug behaviors, that is not a voluntary activity. So if you get trespassed for not being clean and sober from a facility, I wouldn't want the officer trying to determine, whether or not that's a voluntary act or involuntary act for purposes of being homeless.
And that makes sense. And I think like I say, we're fortunate enough that our homeless community is small enough to where at least Kenny knows them all and most of our officers know most of them. In a larger community, I could see that being a real problem, and I wouldn't want officers trying to do it. So, all right, thanks.
All right, Terry, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I'm just curious about, I don't even know how to phrase my question, but as if there, say we have a shelter that has beds in it, and it's like anybody and everybody is allowed to go in there with their pets. But then, there are people who are living on the streets who do not, who say they don't want services for reasons, right? They don't feel safe in the shelter because maybe their abuser is staying at that shelter, or they have kids and they don't want to be in the space with all these other people and their dogs and their whatever the thing is. Is that like a reasonable reason to say no, even if there is conceivably a bed available for them, or is that too nuanced? I guess I don't know.
No, that's a great question. I think it really highlights the reasons why relying on shelter beds is so problematic under these court cases, because we just don't know the answers to those questions about when it is reasonable or not for a person to refuse shelter. Some of the examples that you used, I as a lawyer, I would certainly say are absolutely reasonable. If you're a victim of domestic violence and your abuser's at the shelter, I think it's not reasonable to expect that, we're going to put you in that shelter and say that that's available to you. Same thing with the family with kids, depending on the facts of how the shelter is operated and set up, maybe that is a legitimate basis or maybe not. If you've got a separate family shelter area and that's cordoned off from, the men's area or the women's area, whatever the case might be, then maybe it isn't reasonable for them to reject the shelter. We just don't know the answer to a lot of those questions, which is why sort of relying on shelter beds, except in very clear circumstances, is somewhat problematic.
Oh, Jeff, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks, Chad. If you wouldn't mind staying on for just a few more, as I go through the ordinance, and I'm sure there's going to be some more questions once we present the actual ordinance. So there will be still an opportunity to speak with Chad here just in a little bit. So my goal is to not necessarily, do a super deep dive on the ordinance. I just want to give people kind of a high level overview and let everybody know, kind of what the crux of the ordinance is, and an opportunity to have questions. And we've tried to craft this ordinance in such a way that it will be nimble, it will be flexible in terms of we can make changes, because we know going into this, we're never going to, have a perfect ordinance that's going to address every possible situation. And we've spent a lot of time involving a lot of staff time and talking with people in the community, trying to figure out what's the best way to address this need and provide that balance. What's going to provide the balance in order to address the concerns that people have in the community about where they see people sleeping, and then address from the homeless individual's perspective, and being objectively reasonable as to where they can sleep, and to also recognize that we're, working within the law and the court decisions. So as Chad had mentioned earlier, the key words here are the time, place, and manner. We have already addressed the time and the manner in a previous council meeting. Many of you are very familiar with that already. And so the time has been designated as you can sleep from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then the manner is you can have a bedroll, a sleeping bag, and a tent. But you cannot have any fire or permanent structures. One of the things that Chad did touch on as well is that some cities, for example, Medford does not permit a tent. In Astoria, we felt that it would be hard to not permit a tent in a city that gets somewhere around 78 inches of rain every year. So again, that gets back to the objectively reasonable. What may work for Astoria may be different than works for Medford or some other community. So that's why every community is having to deal with the nuances in their own community. So after the time and manner have been addressed in the council meeting, what's left is the place piece. And again, as we've said, this is the part where, if we don't have available shelter space or options for individuals to sit, lie, sleep, keep warm and dry outdoors on public property, then we have to identify locations on public property open or where people can go. And so this part of the ordinance does specifically deal only with public property. There are some other unique situations that we are still working through. There's areas such as private property that's open to the public, and that would be like the parking lot of the grocery store, for example. And then there's also other private property that's open to the public as well. And then there's other, nuances in our community where we actually have county property that's within the city limits. We also have state property that's within the city limits that belongs to ODOT, et cetera. So all these things, we're trying to address to make sure that they're going to be covered. But we know that we're going to miss something. And again, that's why we're trying to craft it in such a way that it will be flexible and we can make changes, and there'll be even some provisions where the city manager can make certain changes on the fly for public safety reasons, et cetera. As mentioned, the conversation on this ordinance has happened over 8 different public council sessions. And so I'm sure many of you have already heard much about what we're going to be talking about here. And again, that's why I don't want to do too much of a deep dive, but I'm just going to go through it relatively quickly and then obviously allow time for questions. Many cities have chosen to go the route of telling individuals where here's the places you can be. Some cities have chosen to go the route where here's the place you can't be. We've explored all the different options, and we've kind of landed on more of a hybrid approach. We're letting individuals know here's the places you can't be, and then here's the places you can be. So we've started with, the excluded areas. So all public parks are excluded. All sidewalks where you can't maintain at least 6 feet of a clear continuous width while camping are excluded. All city-owned and maintained parking lots. You cannot be underneath roadways or bridges that are not open to the public. cannot be within 10 feet of any building entrance or exit, including the stairwells. All public owned and maintained restrooms and real property and rights of ways, including sidewalks located within primary residential zones. So the areas that are available would be any areas that the council may permit on public locations through a council resolution, and where the city manager may adopt administrative rules to designate certain locations as prohibited locations for safety related reasons. We also plan to post on the city's website where people may be allowed and also where they are not allowed. So in other words, what that leaves is areas along, not in the roadway, of course, not in the street, but there are certain areas that are identified outside the right of way where people will be allowed to sleep on what's left of the public available properties. We're actually working on a map right now to depict this. We're not quite ready to share the map yet, simply because it's really hard to show on the map the areas that are permitted and the areas that aren't permitted. And we're trying to work through that. We want to have something that's more descriptive of where individuals can go. And again, our goal is to be nimble and to make sure that we, have the flexibility to change some of the areas if it isn't working. And there's also some provisions that are built in that if some of the areas that are permitted are abused, that they can be withdrawn. Let me pull up the next piece here. Let's see. Opening. Okay, so the next piece of the ordinance deals with the private property areas. And this is the areas that, such as certain areas may want to allow camping, for example, like the parking lot of certain religious institutions. And there'll be some restrictions. There'll be allowed up to 6 persons or 3 total passenger vehicles or tents that may be used in the following types of property, which would include real property owned by a religious institution, a nonprofit organization, or perhaps even some vacant or unoccupied commercial or industrial real property with permission of the property owner. There was early on, there was some discussion about the possibility of allowing certain camping on the front of residential property, but there was a lot of pushback and a lot of feedback to the community, and that is not currently part of the plan. So residential property would not be allowed. Are restrictions if somebody chooses to permit camping on private property. They have to be able to provide sanitary facilities, which includes at least 1 toilet and sink, have garbage disposal services, have storage area for campers to store any personal property, and they cannot accept any money or any other services. And there's some other provisions in there as well. Let's see here if I'm missing anything. So either Kenny, Chief, anybody that's working on this, anything right now that appears that I may be missing?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
I think you covered it pretty well too. Yes.
Okay. So I think at this point, Monica, go ahead. I see your hand up.
I just had a question in regards to the time piece of it, and Chad had mentioned reasonably objective, and not just reasonably objective to law enforcement, but also to the individual. And so if some of these places that are identified are in front of a business, where a business needs to be able to access their doors, at 7 a.m, who's to determine reasonably objective when it might impact like a business being able to access their facilities?
Right. So one of the things that, Monica, we put in there specifically just for that reason, because we know that that's been a big challenge for our downtown businesses. For example, like the county building, the courthouse, and what have you, is that you can't be within 10 feet of the doorway. And clearly you can't be there during, outside of the time place, but during those times you can't be there either. So that was specifically included to address that piece of it.
Thanks.
Viviana.
Hi, Chief Spalding. When is the ordinance going into place?
So it's going tentatively, it's on the agenda right now for October 17th. And then if council approves it at that meeting, there will be the following meeting after that, there would be the second reading. And then depending if council decides to enact it as an emergency ordinance, it will go in effect right away. If it's not an emergency ordinance, it'll go effect 30 days after the second reading. So about 6 weeks after the first council meeting. Any other questions, thoughts?
Teresa has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Teresa.
Hey, so I guess my question would be, I'm kind of curious about why parks were sort of immediately taken off the table as a spot where people could camp. It just seems like it's sort of the closest semblance we have to a commons area. If we've already decided that the time is going to be in the evening, which I think that like most parks are like not being used a lot then. I don't know, it just seems like an obvious place if we want to allow people some rudimentary shelter to be in a place that was already, we have like big grassy expanses with trees on them. Seems a lot more humane than having people like sleep on the sidewalk. I mean, especially considering that with business owners, and kind of as Monica brought up, for any organization that you're sort of responsible for the sidewalk in front of your home or in front of your business. And so it's kind of like asking people to be responsible for that, but also there's going to be people living in that spot at night. I don't know. The parks just seem like an obvious sell. I'm wondering why that is not being considered or, is explicitly not on the table.
Sure. Thanks for your question, Teresa. I'll probably defer to the mayor if I can here. I will say one of the things. Yeah, go ahead, Mayor. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, it's because the community does not want the parks to be included among the places where camping is proposed to individuals looking for a place to camp. Many of our parks are small parks in neighborhoods surrounded by houses on either side of them. People do walk through parks in the evening, and for the larger parks like Shively, where there's a lot of woods, frankly, we don't want camping taking place out of sight, where there's safety concerns and where there's concern for fire hazard for much of the year when there's fire bans or fire restrictions in effect. We've already had quite a few. I don't know if the public is aware of how many times the fire department has called for fires when people start just behind people's homes and camping in the woods and start cook fires, and they spread and the fire department has to respond. So it's really in response to the community's desires. Most of the community is not in favor of having parks designated as among the places to allow camping.
One other thing I'll add as well, and Chad, I may ask you to weigh in on this a bit too, but right now the city does have an ordinance prohibiting individuals in the parks. There is a curfew from 10 p.m., I believe it's till 6 a.m. And so by allowing someone to sleep there, obviously you're allowing a certain group of individuals to basically violate the city ordinance. And Chad, I don't know what the current state is. I know we've had this conversation before about places that are off limits, either enacted by ordinance for public safety reasons, but what is the current reasoning or logic surrounding those questions where there's an area that's unlawful because of city ordinance?
So those laws are still, you're still able to enforce those laws as long as it's not the entire city. So to close your park down at a certain time at night and not allow anyone to be in there, regardless of whether they're an individual experiencing homelessness or not, is still something that you can enforce. And people are still doing that. I will just add that in working with several clients across the state, excluding individuals who are experiencing homelessness from camping in parks is pretty common, I think, for a lot of the reasons that the mayor outlined, as well as just the wear and tear on the park facilities and them not being available for other park and recreation uses. That's just been another concern that folks have raised across the state. It's, I agree at first glance, it seems like the obvious area. But having sat through several of these meetings, it's really sort of become more and more apparent why there's a higher level of opposition to parks, just because folks are worried that those parks are not going to be available for the originally intended use.
I will tell you from and then I'll get to you, Laura. I will tell you from a practical standpoint, one of the concerns has been raised again is, the Astoria Police Department, does a very good job responding to calls, but it's not an unlimited size police department with the ability to go around and check every location at 7 o'clock in the morning and ensure that people are moved on. And we also know from experience that many of these individuals, aren't necessarily going to set their alarm for 7 a.m. and, pick up their tent and move on. And again, that was one of the conversations about, having it in parks is that, who's going to go out there and going to be able to, wake people up at 7 and move on and, get the park ready for the daily use. So that was one of the concerns as well. Laura, you had your hand up. Laura, if you're there and you're speaking, you're muted.
Darn. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can. Yep.
Okay, I'm Laura Runyon, and I've been here following this for a year. I have one question that I haven't heard anything mentioned, and I'm curious about this. I addressed this to Mayor Jones. Is there any money that the city is putting out for the homeless with the rules as is right now? As they are, wrong English.
Is the city spending any money? Is that what the question
Correct.
was? Just
yeah.
a
Is there any expenditure?
or do you mean in support of any specific program?
The whole homeless problem, especially in the winter with all the shelters and the lack of space, is I don't know how to word it. Are we in Astoria paying for any part of the homeless to solve a homeless problem with the rules as they've been in the past years? Is there money being spent that can be put towards something different? That's the question.
Yeah, sure. So the salary of the new created community service officer position with compensation and benefits, that's a pretty significant new expense over the past year. There are through community service organization grants, the city does give money towards organizations that are addressing homelessness. The city is not building shelters and has no current plans to construct, build, or fund the running of shelters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for me, any of the city staff or Chad while we have Chad here? Nate, good morning.
Hey, good morning. I just had a question as far as, see if I can get this going here. Excuse me. I heard you talk about like the parks. There's an ordinance in place as far as no camping, and you're enforcing. Over here on the South Slope, we have a couple of the gravel areas that are across from some of the houses and stuff. And there's signs up that say no camping with an ordinance number, except The motorhomes have sat there for quite a while. I mean, one in particular was there for almost 4 weeks, and then it drives away. I know they've used the excuse before that they can't operate it themselves, except we here get to watch them drive by all the time. When they leave, we're left with a huge mess of garbage, needles, and other stuff that's left behind. And with that ordinance in place that there's no camping there, my question is how come they're allowed to stay camping in front of a sign that says no camping? But yet in the parks area, somebody can't put a tent up because there's already an ordinance.
So I have some thoughts on that, because I guess first off, I'll say that there are separate rules that apply to recreational vehicles, or any motor vehicles for that matter. And actually, we did modify our recreational vehicle ordinance at a couple of council meetings that has some new provisions in there to give some additional tools. Before I go into any details, Chief Kelly, do you want to touch on that at all? I'm not sure to the extent that you've been apprised of what we've been working on in that, or Kenny.
Yeah, I may have to defer to Kenny if I mess this up, but first of all, I would say call us on those. I do know that the officers chase those motorhomes around. And by that, I mean they will address it and it just moves on and shows up somewhere else the next day, and we don't know until it's there. So call us and we'll definitely check into it. And Kenny, I'll let you speak to the specifics of what enforcement we can do on those.
The enforcement we can do on those is we treat them like an abandoned auto, and that the challenge we could get on trying to tow a motorhome is trying to remove the person from the motorhome. That becomes a real challenge. There would be an additional process. Administrative warrant would likely have to be sought to get the people out before it was towed. We try everything first to get them to move along. We do tag them as abandoned and try to work with them the best we can. Motorhomes are the biggest challenge, I think, to any community, really.
And I understand that. I know it's a pain to tow them. I'm sure we can all figure out. I mean, we all know who the one is I'm talking about with Westfall stuff. And where I'm situated at the other end of my road was the trap house, as we call it here, that got shut down. But when we sit here at night and I can count the individuals that go from that house to the motorhome in front of the county shop and back every day. I mean, you're well aware. I've talked to you, all the officers that we've talked. I've called so many times on them. I feel like I'm wasting your time anymore. But at the same time, they're able to drive because they do leave. We've watched them leave at night, and I've seen where the one burnt out on the county road where they go and dump their stuff there and then come back and park, and my cameras catch it. And it's just, to me, it was like, okay, I get it. But it's in front of a sign that says there's an ordinance, no camping here. And it can sit there for 4 weeks. But I guess my thing is we just heard that you can enforce an ordinance of the parks being closed from 10 to 6, so they can't camp there, and that's still okay to enforce that. Here's an ordinance that says no camping. It's already in effect, and that motorhome gets to stay there for 4 weeks while we get to watch all the stuff accumulate. And then when they finally move, you can't go over there because you can't walk next to that water because you're going to run into all their garbage that's left behind. I guess my question is when can we start enforcing? I don't care if the camper stays there, as long as they have to abide by all the rules of picking up after that when they're gone. I mean, that's my biggest pet peeve on the South Slope, is watching the amount of garbage that gets left where each one of these motorhomes are.
Yeah, it shouldn't sit there for 4 weeks, but Kenny, you're familiar with that. We'll get together after this and.
Oh, it's definitely gone now. It's in Warrenton. It's over by the Lewis and Clark, or across from the recycle yard now. That was one of our frustrations. It's that same motorhome for the last couple of years that has traveled this South Slope, and there's a lot of drug dealing that are going through. We know somebody that's addicted and has very well said that's where they go.
Yeah. Yeah, so if it comes back, be sure if we don't see it first, let us know. But like Kenny said, it's very complex, and it's so complex that if they put a no trespassing sign on their door, that changes the way we respond completely. So if it comes back, call us for sure.
They put a sign up there that says no trespassing, and I've watched you guys tag it. They go out the same day it's done and peeled off, and then they say they've never been tagged, and that's where we're kind of like over here going, okay, I got a bus stop in front of my house that has a bunch of kids, and this motorhome that's we know is dealing drugs and doing all this stuff is getting more rights than these kids down here because I can't let them go over there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Nate, I'll just say that, my experience with this has been one of the most frustrating things that we've had to deal with, just because our hands are tied on so many levels. And, we did, like I mentioned earlier, add some new provisions to, enforce some things. Like, for example, you have to have current registration, you have to have license plates, and, there's some other things too. The vehicle can't be in a total state of disrepair, as clearly many of them are. The key thing, though, is what Kenny mentioned too, is that, the difference is, from just towing the vehicles, we don't always know if someone's in a vehicle. We can't simply go inside and look to see if someone's in there. And the city's not going to take the risk of towing a vehicle with somebody inside the vehicle. The other problem, of course, is we only have one tow service in town that even has the ability to tow the motorhomes. They won't store them. So we then have to store the motor vehicle at the city yard. That's even assuming that the tow company agrees to pick up the vehicle. And then we're stuck with the hazardous waste. And it's just some very, very significant challenges. We have, I would say, over the last year or two, been able to remove several motorhomes that have gone to salvage, and we've taken those off the road. But I know the one you're speaking of, and I know how frustrating it is. And although we have some additional tools, there are still some enforcement challenges. So again, it's we hear you, not necessarily the best answer you're looking for.
And I appreciate what you guys are doing. I'm just saying, like it said, they're in front of a sign that has no camping, and it's a city ordinance. And so then when somebody tries to put up a tent in a small park that doesn't affect anybody, they can't, because there's already an ordinance that you are going after them for. And so that's just what was my thing is, okay, well, there's an ordinance already in place, but nobody enforces it down here. But a person can't put a tent up in a park.
So, Jeff, maybe I could help just address that real quick, just to clarify my previous answer about the being in the parks after dark. Is that the ordinances that the courts looked at were the anti-camping ordinances? When that's the ordinance that you're asking, why isn't that being enforced? And I wasn't involved in that, but I can imagine part of the reason why is the courts basically said that you can't enforce those laws any longer. Whereas the curfew law, the closing the parks at a certain time, wasn't the anti-camping ordinance. That's not the law that was subject to the court decision.
Okay.
So there's a bit of a difference between the laws that are being enforced. And I know that doesn't address all the other issues that you're raising, but I think there's a difference between why the no camping isn't being enforced versus the other ones are being enforced.
Okay, that does. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. I see Terry, your hand up, and then Teresa after Terry.
I have just two questions, and I apologize. I probably should know the answer to the first one, but because all of these things have been happening. But for folks who are living in mobile homes or vehicles, where are they? Is there a place where they are supposed to be, other than where they might be right now? And then my second question, just in relation to that, with like licenses and stuff, is I understand like why people need to be insured and registered and have a license, but on some level, isn't it safer for people to live in a car than it is for them to live in a tent on a sidewalk?
But Terry, and I think I got most of what you said. There's kind of a bad connection there, and it might help maybe turning off the audio. That might help a little bit, be less broken up. Kenny or Chief, do you want to speak to any of Terry's questions?
Kenny, I'll let you pick up the motorhome.
I'm sorry, Chief.
Okay.
So Kenny
Terry, okay. Hey, Terry, could you ask that again? I was looking at something here.
I think the first part of the question was.
Sorry, it's just, is there somewhere precisely that people are supposed to park their motorhomes, or if they're living in their cars, is there a place they're supposed to be versus like in front of Nate's house?
There is no specific place for them to go, which creates the challenge, really. Where do they go when there is no specific place? So that's why we're seeing them around town at various locations, cars at different locations with people in them too. You know, and it would be nice if there was a place for everybody to go. Then they would be able to comply maybe a little better. But right now we don't have anywhere for them to go. So we just look at each individual motorhome vehicle on a case-by-case basis, try to help the people, try to gain their compliance. A lot of times just they'll move to another location, then we'll get another call and we go talk to them again there. We do the best we can. You know, there is no specific place for them right now.
And
Mayor, were you going to make a comment or something?
I'm good. I do think we probably, given that it's 10 after 11 and we've got a pretty lengthy agenda, recognize the complexity of this issue. And I appreciate the fact that our new police chief, Kelly, has said that he and Kenny will be looking into the RV issue more closely. But I don't think we're going to get to a resolution today. So it might be time to move on to the next item.
Okay, and then I know Tracy, you had your hand up, so I'll let you speak and then we can move on.
Yeah, just kind of touching on what Nathan and Terry said and acknowledging that what Kenny said too, that there's really no ideal solutions here, but I mean, we are exploring like changing laws. So, I mean, I just think that like if we're referencing public opposition to parks, then like people are also opposed to homelessness and housing and people sleeping on the sidewalk. And I mean, we're talking about like the best option out of a lot of not ideal options. So I just, that just feel like that's important to keep in mind as we're exploring this.
Yeah, definitely agree. All right. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody's input. I'll just say that, if some other question comes to mind, you can feel free to email me, Chief Kelly, and if I can't answer it, I'll make sure it gets to the right person. We still have several weeks before this goes to council. And so there's opportunity for, individuals to weigh in. So appreciate all the input and more to come. Okay, next up, we have Monica about ARPA funds and housing project conversations.
Sure, thanks. So just to kind of recap in regards to the ARPA funds for the 21-22 fiscal year, the county distributed $270,000 to various social service organizations, navigation centers, and emergency shelter organizations. And then we also utilized $80,000 to go towards mobile crisis response. In the coming, or the year that we're now in, the 22-23 fiscal year, the county has set aside $275,000 for the navigation centers, emergency shelters, and other nonprofit social services. And then we have set aside $260,000 in regards to mobile crisis response, as well as increased mental health care in the jail facility. So the ARPA funds are continuing to be utilized in that way. For 22-23, that will be going before the board here in the next month or so for discussion and then approval. In regards to some of the housing projects that the county is working on, so back in, it was last year, we submitted an application for a brownfield assessment grant, and we were awarded that, I believe, in May. And we have now gone under contract with a firm to help us go through the assessment piece, and our application was focusing on those brownfield sites that would be able to be redeveloped for housing or economic development. And brownfields are what they're called, but the term that would be preferred to use, so that way it doesn't seem like it's this bad, horrible place, is an opportunity site. And the county is working with Colpack on this, and the firm that we hired is Stantec, and this grant will provide funding through the year, I believe it's December of 2025 or thereabouts. And so there have already been several properties assessed. Some of them are privately owned, and so it's a matter of whether or not the private owner would like to go through this assessment and see about getting their land cleaned for the purpose of that type of development. And so that's one project that we are working on. Another one is we submitted an application for Project Turnkey 2.0, and we've made it to the second phase of that application process. So that means that we will begin working with a realtor to identify potential properties. Originally, Project Turnkey was in response to the wildfires and those individuals who were displaced because of that. And it was utilized to acquire, the monies were utilized to acquire hotel properties to put individuals in. And so Project Turnkey 2.0 just kind of expanded that, as well as made it so that it's not necessarily specific to hotels. Because while you're a tourist destination, hotels are always full. They're not necessarily interested in selling. So what we are going to be looking at is if there are viable options from a hotel perspective, as well as if there are viable options that are larger, not necessarily as large as a hotel, but larger than a single family dwelling that we might be able to utilize for these purposes as well. We're also working on expanding our relationship with NOAA. As many of you might know, the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority has a new executive director in Elisa. And the county is excited to work with her and see what we might be able to do, also utilizing ARPA funds to be able to work with the Housing Authority to get more units available in Clatsop County. So that's kind of the gist of everything that we're working on right now around housing. Oh, and then just one other thing, there is a housing dashboard that the county has been working on with the cities, and it helps people kind of be able to look at this map and see where housing is being developed. Some of it might be affordable, some of it might be market rate. And so then that way people can kind of see what is coming online or what is attempting to come online. So that can be found on our county website as well. So that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Any questions, Monica? All right, thanks, Monica. Let's see, county-wide liaison update, Jerome.
Thank you. Just lost my mute button there for a minute. Yeah, it's been a long time since we've been meeting in this format, so it's nice to see everybody here together again. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's been some changes with our homeless liaison team. We're down to now just one person in the field. That's Cheryl Paul, is our liaison, boots on the ground. We've been really lucky to have been building great collaborative relationships with our community partners, especially the Seaside Astoria Police Department. Big shout out to Officers Knock and Hansen for working so closely. Also, in the past couple of months, got a wonderful donation from the county. We got a decommissioned sheriff's vehicle that is now branded with CCA side pieces, and it has enabled us to be a lot more visible in the community and to cover a lot more ground as well. We've been working a little more closely with code enforcement. It's allowed Cheryl to get out to some of the more rural and remote areas, and yeah, and connect with people and try to make a difference in those places that have been a little more difficult to reach. But that's kind of the main gist of it. Anybody have any questions about anything specific?
All righty. Thank you, Jerome. Appreciate that. Mike Davis, Helping Hands.
Good morning. Thank you. So our Uniontown facility is quite full right now. We have one bed space left in the female dorm for emergency shelter. We've been working with people that are in the emergency shelter and moving them into our long-term program as quick as we can. And we've had a lot of success in graduating people from that program and continuing to move people into emergency shelter. Across the county, we're excited. We'll have the warming center open again this year in Seaside. We're in process right now for actually purchasing that property using some of the Behavioral Health Resource Network funds that came about. The exciting piece about that is also located on that property is the original Thugs Off Drugs building that Alan started the organization with. So not only will we have the drop-in navigation warming center, we'll have emergency shelter, and we'll have some additional long-term reentry beds as well. So that's it for us across the county. We've just kept really busy. The partnerships, I think, with CCA, working with Monica, working with some of the other groups as well, has been really strong over the summer, especially working through the Behavioral Health Resource Network grants. That's all I've got, unless there's any questions.
This is Lisa from Clatsop County Department of Public Health. Can you, when you get your Seaside Warming Center open, could you maybe email me and let me know, because we would like to go down and to offer flu vaccines or whatever services that we could provide down there. I know we do the warming center in Astoria, but coming into Seaside would be a good addition for us.
Sure. I'll send you a private message and give you my email address.
Thank you.
Mike, there's a question on the board there. If the Seaside Warming Shelter is open daily, do you know?
It will be open daily coming this year, I believe, because it is a navigation center as well, where we do help people. So we'll have a drop-in piece of it. But Viviana, if I'm speaking out of turn, please let me know.
Yeah. So the Seaside Warming Center is a partnership between Class Community Action and Helping Hands. And we receive funding from Oregon Housing Community Services to provide a warming center. So we're not able to open every day. It's all about weather permitted. So we are going to follow the regulations for weather permitted for Seaside, which is can only be open up to, I believe, 90 days. But we'll have a lot more information coming up within the next few weeks. And every time we're open, we'll be sending out an email to our distribution list, so all of you will know when that'll be.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Can I ask one,
go
one
ahead, Terry.
clarifying thing? Sorry. Does that mean the navigation center is open daily, but the warming shelter nighttime part is open just when
we
needed?
have, yeah, that's a very good question, Terry, because it's a little bit confusing, and it's a little bit confusing for us too still, because we really want to be open every day. But however, we have to look at our fundings and see if the warming center will be able to be open every day. Essentially, yes, we have Helping Hand has the navigation center under their umbrella. The warming center, it's a collaboration between the two agencies, and because we are mixing fundings, so we just have to make sure that we follow regulations of each fundings that is coming to provide the warming center in Seaside. Thank you.
But we will be expanding on our emergency shelter side, using part of the building as well.
So it's, as I mentioned, great collaboration. And then we're just hoping to be there for our shelter population and our our community in need. So there's going to be a lot more information coming your way, hopefully before December. There's a lot of pieces that need to be ironed out, and especially when it comes to funding. So hopefully we'll open up the Warming Center on time. Hopefully Helping Hands opens the Navigation Center right at the time that we are opening the Warming Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. I appreciate that. Okay, Oz, Lifeboat Services update.
This has been a while. I'm not sure if we had updated the host as to the renewal of our lease. We have secured a 5-year lease with a 5-year option. Lifeboat Services is working on its second year of operation in our location at 1040 Commercial, continuing to provide navigation services Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. We plan on expanding that 7 days a week at some point in the future, likely by next year. Filling Empty Bellies is going on 8 years, providing food and basic needs in Astoria. Also, the Beacon Clubhouse is celebrating its 2nd year anniversary, and we look forward to continuing to expand our bandwidth to reach as much of the county as possible to provide our much needed services. If anybody wants further updates on either of our programs, the Beacon Clubhouse or Filling Empty Bellies, please feel free to go to our Facebook pages or our websites. And we have a pretty cool newsletter here for the Beacon Clubhouse produced by our members. We're currently averaging about 50 meals a day served to our participants. We're continuing to work with other local agencies in order to best serve the members and participants of both our programs, including but not limited to the Warming Center, Clatsop Behavioral Health, the Harbor, local law enforcement, the courts, probation offices. We're also very close to installing a fire suppression system in our upper level, which is the last piece to enable lifeboat services to start year-round overnight stays. We believe as of yesterday, as of yesterday, we have all the proper documentation and requirements for the city to issue a permit. Once the permit has been issued, it'll be a matter of weeks before installation is completed, as the system has been prefabricated and is awaiting installation at our contractor's warehouse. At this time and continuing forward, we will be calling on our local network of volunteers and are in the beginning stages of looking for a few staff members to facilitate this addition to our services. We'll be working with the Astoria Warming Center towards providing the best services to all our participants. Any questions? Please feel free.
All righty, any questions for Oz? Okay, Oz, thank you. Appreciate the work you're doing, and thanks for the update.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Chief Spalding?
Yes.
I have my hand up.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hi, Oz. Did I miss it, or did you say that Filling Empty Bellies will be doing the Astoria Warming Center? Did I misunderstand?
No, what I said was that we are working with the Astoria Warming Center towards providing the best services to all of our participants. So we're just going to collaborate with them in any way possible.
Okay. I'm just curious to know if the Astoria Warming Center will be open, because I've been hearing that they might not be ready for winter season. Is that
I cannot speak to the Warming Center's operations, except to say that we are working with them.
But is Teresa on the call? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to talk about that. This is a good time.
Yeah, Teresa, just because we're talking about Warming Center, I've been hearing that maybe the Astoria Warming Center might not be open. Am I hearing this wrong?
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily phrase it that way. I think that we do have, it's not necessarily a matter of whether or not we would open, but how we would open. We have every intention of opening and making sure that there is overnight shelter. I know we have some board members who are meeting with you today to talk about potential collaborations. I know that as Oz has talked about getting closer and closer to having a permanent year-round shelter, in my mind, it makes a ton more sense for when there's so much need in the unhoused population rather than having two shelters operating 4 blocks from each other to support their efforts. You know, as you mentioned, with operating a warming center in Seaside, there are some limitations on there, and 90 days a year just does not cover the need in this town. So it's my opinion that a permanent year-round shelter is what we need, a lot more than a warming center. And if we can throw our support behind them and offer complementary services to them, that's kind of what I've been in talks with Oz for a while. As you know, we're now talking with CCA about some potential options for partnering with you guys. I would love to see us kind of be an evening navigation center and a hub for other organizations, you know, connecting us all. We all need to be working together for our clients. So I love fostering that and seeing that happen. I don't need to be the one bottom lining that. I also resigned from being the executive director of the Warming Center many months ago. So I don't want to sound like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that remains to be seen from our board talking with you and our board continuing to talk with Lifeboat. But yeah, it's my opinion that I'll work with anybody. I think we just all need to work together to come up with a little more comprehensive solution. So yeah, besides potentially having people co-located out of the warming center, another idea that we've talked about is offering drop-in services. And I would love to see there be a contingency plan for when Oz is full. But yeah, I think this is super relevant. I'm glad that you asked, Donna, because I wanted to let everyone in this group know with as much notice as possible that when we're talking about the camping ordinance, what Chad was talking about is low barrier shelter, and that the warming center has traditionally done low barrier shelter. Oz has traditionally done low barrier shelter, and we both continue to make sure that's happening. But as Terry mentioned, you know, I mean, being low barrier also means that if we take everyone, then that means that we take people that might have a restraining order against them, that might be a sex offender. You know, you can't have everybody and also have everybody be safe. And so I would love to see a partnership with the harbor. You know, potentially, I think there needs to be a contingency plan for when Lifeboat is full. But yeah, we remain committed to making sure that people have a safe, warm place to sleep at the least, you know.
All righty. Well, thank you all. Let's see. So the next topic was, I was having a conversation with the mayor recently. I know he received a question about, you know, what is the status of storage lockers? And I know we had a couple different people that were involved in that topic. So I'm looking to see if anybody could provide an update on the storage lockers. I believe there was some, Joan, maybe you might have had some involvement, or Viana, with any conversation on the storage lockers, where we're at on that topic for the unhoused individuals.
I recall the topic coming up, but I have not been involved in any discussions or proposals. So sorry if that's something that should be on my radar, but it is not.
No, I'm just going from memory, and I probably misspoke. Sorry, Jonah. Viviana, was CCA, I believe that CCA or someone mentioned that they'd be interested in assisting if somebody was to run with it. All right. And I know Oz, you were as well.
I sent some, we did some homework about a few, I don't know, maybe 7 months ago or so, I'm trying to remember. And then I sent everything I found to the former city city manager. I haven't heard anything back.
Okay. And Oz, I believe that you had also, looking at some of the previous minutes, had mentioned that you'd be willing to assist in a project like that if somebody else was to get the ball rolling or the funding source was identified. Does that ring a bell?
Absolutely, and the answer is yes. We want to collaborate with anyone that is looking to do anything that's going to help to further our cause. We're here.
Okay, thank you, Oz. Mayor, does that partially help my faulty memory?
Yeah, that's what I recall as well. I know Brett had some conversations, but I don't think it got anywhere near any kind of resolution in terms of identifying the property. So I guess that would be the sort of next step would be, since there's a couple of entities that say they're willing to manage a storage locker, the question is where do you put it? And is there some property that could be identified that would be appropriate, or multiple properties? It might be better, and I would rely on some of the agency representatives on this group. Is it better to have multiple locations with, say, a maximum of eight or nine lockers, or one location with 40 lockers? Given that by definition, wherever you have a locker, this is going to be where unhoused individuals congregate to put their things, to get their things. And it's going to have to be somewhere, which means it's next to something. And it's sort of the same thing as camping. You'll have issues with people that say, I really don't want that facility located there. So it's the same. It's going to be the same challenge with identifying a location. So if people have ideas, not necessarily share right now, but if you come up with something, by all means, send them to Jeff so he can get them out to the right members of the group. If you have ideas for locations that you think would be an ideal location for something like that, then I think that would be the next step, is to identify those locations.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Let's see, Kenny, and then I'm going to come back to Ron next. So Kenny, if you wouldn't mind just providing an update on, it's been 6 months since we met, and just your general sense of the homeless problem. I've heard a lot of good things about some of the work that you've done as the homeless liaison officer, the CRO. But I also know that, due to some personnel shortages, you haven't been able to spend as much time as you'd like. But what's your overall sense, kind of just giving a little overview from the last 6 months from the boots on the ground?
Yeah, well, for the month of May, I did the CRO job full time. June, I rotated back into patrol, which then I was doing patrol and also doing the CRO job when time permitted. Recently, we've seen an uptick in unsheltered people from out of the county, from Arizona, Washington, the Portland area, Idaho, and California. A couple of those people I've been able to help, a few of them actually. One guy, I got a new job at Burger King. Another guy, he ended up here, he ran out of gas and his car got towed by OSP. And he didn't know where his car went or anything because he walked away from his car before it got towed. And so I helped him track that down, got a hold of his mom. His mom helped him out by sending him a phone. And Classic Towing was very generous in helping him get his vehicle back so he would have a place to live. And now he's on his way, continuing on his journey. There's a family here in town who's come here with expectations that they would have housing. They didn't have any. It ended up in recently a domestic violence situation. They have a 14-year-old girl. Working with the school district and community action to help them, and hopefully get them back to Idaho soon. And we've recently had a new gentleman come here from the Portland area who has significant mental health issues. Got him connected with Classic Behavioral, and hopefully he'll be able to get back on track too. We're addressing a lot of the bad behavior, the garbage on the Riverwalk, things like that. We're addressing the people that are creating that. weather is changing, so we just last couple days we've been seeing more people in doorways. Been reminding those people in the doorways that if the business belongs to Property Watch, that they need to find somewhere else to go. And I think it's something. This is going to be really something that's real important to point out is that I think as we start looking into the unsheltered population more, that we look at these people from a county-wide perspective, not necessarily these people are from Astoria, these people are from Warrenton, these are people from Seaside, things like that. Because it's really common for people to be traveling from Astoria to Seaside, that some people think they're from here. The majority of their time is spent in Astoria, but then they go to Seaside, and then vice versa. We have a lot of Seaside people that come to Astoria. And there's people from Warrenton that go to both places, and everybody kind of goes everywhere. So as I would say, our local unsheltered would be the Clatsop County residents, not just Astoria, Warrenton, Seaside, such like that. Because there's some people that are thinking, if I go somewhere, and I'm challenged or something like that, I tell them, they'll tell them that Kenny said it's okay, but I'm not telling them it's okay. But they think there's a lot of credibility in using my name that it is okay to be somewhere when it's not. So I get calls from our own guys even. It's like, nope, I never told them that was okay at all either. So let's see what else. Working closely with Community Action and Oz. Oz has been really great in providing some shower cards for use at the Aquatic Center. And let's see, that's it.
Hey, if I could piggyback on that real quick, Kenny touched on it a little bit, but I just received an email before this meeting that mentioned this committee. It was brought up at Seaside City Council that Kenny is sending people to Seaside, and they wanted to know what this committee thought about this. I will tell everyone, just like I'm telling this person, we do not do that as a practice. It is done to us quite frequently from counties across the bridge. So we know what it's like to have people transported and dropped off in our city, and it's not an acceptable act. And it's unfortunate that that was brought up down at Seaside, and I've asked them for any particular instances, and it hasn't been provided. So I just want to get it out there. If y'all hear, I want you to hear from us that we don't do that stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, Kenny. I appreciate that update. Any other final questions for Kenny before we move on?
This is Lisa from Clatsop County Department of Public Health, and I can speak when we're out doing our harm reduction program on Thursdays that the homeless in our county are very much mobile. They go between Seaside, Warrenton, Astoria. We can't put a tag on somebody and say you're a homeless person in Seaside or you're a homeless person in Astoria. People go where they need services. And if services are in Astoria, that's where they're going to go, or Seaside. And so I really want to commend Kenny on mentioning that it is a county-wide problem, not just one city. So thanks for making this more inclusive of everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate the clarification. Monica?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, these are people, and just like those who are housed, we travel all over the county as well. And so to say somebody shouldn't be going to one jurisdiction, we can't control that. So.
Yeah, good point. All righty. Ron Maxted, you want to talk, give a little update on Clatsop Opportunity Village?
Yes, I do. And can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to have the group back together and So the last 6 months, I've been tied up with other matters, one relating to the warming center and a building project. But I see the light in the tunnel, and I am no longer on the warming center board after 6 years. I've taken the opportunity to step off the board. So I'm excited about where Opportunity Village can go. Of course, the one obstacle that hasn't been taken care of, and I just haven't had the time in the past to clarify, but we do have another offer for a sponsorship. And so the sponsorship is kind of the first step for Clatsop Opportunity Village, because we have to have liability when we go out because dealing with the public. So anyway, and just to kind of refresh people, and we have some new people. So where Clatsop Opportunity Village is going, we are following a successful plan that has been implemented in Eugene, and that's Square One Villages, and squareonevillages.org if you want to familiarize yourself with what they're doing. But we are following the plan on how they went forward. And one of the first things that will be happening is to put together a demonstration model transitional home or shelter, whatever you want to call it. And that first step, according to Dan Bryant, the executive director of the Square One Villages, was their big stepping off point, their introducing the community to the concept of transitional home, because people don't know what that is. I mean, what they look like. And so that will be our first step. And then with that put together, we hope to start taking that around to various places, various communities, Seaside, Warrington, Astoria, introducing city councils and also the public, because we are looking to expand our group. Right now, our group consists of 8 people, and we want to expand this idea of a transitional village. And of course, and actually the building of the shelters is not the problem. We have volunteers that are waiting to do this, and they will be affordable, and it's something that is very doable. The big problem, obviously, is the property. Where is it going to be? And this will be something that we'll be looking at in various locations. I have a couple of ideas that I want to pursue, and so that's kind of where Opportunity Village is. But it's very much there and alive, and I hope by the end of the year that we have a model together. And I want to explore some opportunities in location that we have in the city. And so, thank you.
All right, thanks, Ron. I appreciate that update. I appreciate your work on that. That looks like that pretty much wraps up the majority of the roundtable here, of the meeting, and I'll go to the roundtable here in a second. So for the members of the group, rather than going through the roster, does any of the members of the group have anything else not on agenda for the good of the order? Okay. Seeing none, one little brief thing I wanted to mention too, when I was talking about the ordinance earlier, one of the most important pieces of this is how we ultimately communicate this out and ensure that the individuals who are impacted, make sure they have the information that they need. And so in addition to Kenny as our CRO getting the information out to individuals that he makes contact, we also want to make sure that the CCA liaisons are fully informed, make sure all the officers are up to speed. We'll post information on the city's livability website. We're in the process of putting together a list of frequently asked questions, which will be available. Share the information through our social service partners. And then lastly, we're working on a trifold brochure that we can hand out to individuals that'll have all the information about where people can and can't go. So I didn't want to close this meeting without sharing that important piece of information. So anyway, so last comments from anybody in the group, guests, members? Okay, great. Let's see, Mayor, any closing comments?
Thank you, everyone, for your great input. Lots of good questions and topics today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be going through some leadership transitions in the city of Astoria with both the mayor, 2 city councilors, and the city manager. And we will be looking at the beginning of next year for someone else to take the helm of the host going into the future. And we'll work with the new mayor and city manager on that. And there was one comment from Nathan about going to a more frequent meeting schedule. And the host is really, it's a communication and coordination forum for all these different organizations and individuals who are working in many different ways to address homelessness. And really the host exists to meet the needs of all of you, to serve as a forum and just a way to share information and get updates. If the group wants to meet more frequently or less frequently, just pass those thoughts on to Jeff. I think, sort of the idea is rather than having at the meetings doing a 2 or 3 hour deep dive into one topic, that we bring these topics up, figure out who's involved, who's working on them. And then if a deep dive is needed, either form a subgroup or just informally work on it offline. So in terms of the RV issue that, was obviously, it's an important issue to the community. And that's why it took a fair amount of time today. I think, Chief Kelly sort of has the lead on that now, as far as seeing if there's anything we can do differently with monitoring and moving these vehicles along, recognizing that that's what you're doing, is you're just moving them along. But certainly as far as if a vehicle moves and there's a cleanup needed, finding out a way to make sure everybody knows who to call to get that to happen quicker. We're interested in doing that. But I don't necessarily. Well, again, if the group wants to meet more frequently, absolutely, we will host this meeting to meet the needs of all the members with the frequency that folks. So far it's been generally every couple of months, but we can change that as we move forward if the members would like to. And other than that, I just want to say thanks everybody for the great questions and the great input.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. And once the minutes are dictated, sometimes that takes several weeks. They review this actual recorded session and they prepare the minutes. So you can imagine that takes some time to do, and then we review them. So once we get those back, we'll get those out to the group. We'll also let the group know well in advance of the next meeting, once Mayor and I have a chance to confer about that. And so again, appreciate everybody. It's good seeing everybody after 6 months, and we'll see you all at the next meeting, and have a good week. Okay, take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.